Again, I'm Christina Pope with Welcoming America, a national nonprofit organization that supports local governments and nonprofits to foster more welcoming communities for immigrant residents with gains for all people who live there. And I have the pleasure today of introducing our distinguished guests for this panel, where we'll be discussing why equitable access is important for newcomers and the entire community, which really our videos queued up so well for us. And we'll also be talking about how our panelists have advanced equity in education and language access. We have a short time together today, so I'll keep their biographies brief and hope that you both will tell us more about your personal stories as we dive into the discussion. State Representative Dr. Dan Johnson grew up on a farm in eastern Nebraska. He has been an educator for 50 years, 42 years as an administrator. Johnson was elected to the Utah House of Representatives for the 2019 to 2020 session, where he proudly represents the citizens of Logan in House District 4. In his career, Johnson has been particularly interested in creating opportunities for students to form meaning from the experiences that they have. And he's the recipient of numerous awards recognizing his contributions to education. And State Senator Fabian Doñate was appointed in February 2021 to represent Nevada's 10th Senate District in Clark County, Nevada. Doñate has served as a consultant for major health systems and smaller organizations, and he is a trained major gift fundraiser with practical experience in the nonprofit sector, specializing in public health research and development. As the son of Mexican immigrants, Doñate has devoted most of his career to raising awareness for causes that will make his community a better place. Thank you both so much for joining us today. And given that this session has a focus on education, I think it's worth noting that you are both the first in your family to graduate from college. You both went on to earn graduate degrees that really inform your work today. So again, welcome, thank you for joining us. And let's turn to you first, Representative Johnson. This year, you introduced a resolution and you've already filed 2 bills for the 2022 session, which are related to local school policies as they impact refugee children. Why is this issue important to you?
Well, thank you. And I'm glad to be a part of this panel today and have this opportunity to talk about something that's so important. It really matters to me as an educator because you take a look at the need of children, and every child needs a caring adult in their life. And many kids come, to schools who they lack background, they have gaps in their learning, and so it's just really important to me to take a look at what those needs are. And when I was in schools, I tried to fill gaps in learning. Now that I'm in the legislature, people have reached out to me, and I find that there are gaps in policy, whether it's at the state level or at local level. So I'm continuing to work on that. So it's important for me because I think it really is an important part of reaching out and recognizing the needs of people and trying to help them.
Mm-hmm. And as an educator, you take that approach to identifying a gap and then working towards those solutions. So we're glad to hear about that work that you've been doing in the legislature and from one of your constituents, or not a constituent, but rather one of your fellow state Utahns about her work. Senator Doñate, going to you, in your first term in the Nevada legislature this year, you advanced a bill to establish a language access plan for the state. Can you tell us more about this? What does language access really mean, and how will this bill help?
Well, thank you so much, Christina, and good afternoon to those of you who are attending virtually on today's Ready to Welcome States Liga Foundation Virtual Summit. My name is Fabian Doñate, and I represent Senate District 10, which is in Las Vegas, Nevada. And I just want to quickly just address and express my deep and sincerest appreciation for being able to speak with you all today on issues that relate to immigrants and refugees. I think it's important for us to understand that we all come from various and different backgrounds and individual experiences that shape our interests, and I am no different to that conversation. For me, my background is mostly in the field of public health because when I was a teenager, I had some experiences that led me to pursue post-secondary education in both public health and health administration. I always share the story that my inclination to study public health began after my experience translating for my father. My dad's an immigrant from Zacatecas, Mexico, and a Spanish speaker who was diagnosed with diabetes when I was a teenager. And since there was no translator available, I was the one that was asked to translate the doctor's medical terms that were often unfamiliar words, so my dad could understand what the doctor was telling him. And that experience made me aware of the gaps that we have in our medical care system and the challenges that we have. But the efforts made by the Refugee Advocacy Lab, one of the hosts of this summit, to bring awareness to the significance of health disparities among underserved populations to the forefront of this discussion and to improve access in the United States is necessary and commendable. And when I was appointed in early February to the Nevada State Senate, representatives from the Refugee Advocacy Lab contacted me about carrying a bill that would help improve public health and solve many of the barriers that we see right now with the COVID-19 pandemic, which brings that to Senate Bill 318, which would make improvements to language access to services and governmental agencies. The bill requires DHHS, which is our Department of Public Health and Behavioral Health, and each health district department to take certain measures to ensure that our services to restrain the spread of COVID-19 are readily available for people who do not speak English primarily. And that means that to help solve and end this pandemic, we have to maintain a record of preferred languages so that we understand what services are needed for whether it's interpretation or staff members to the extent practicable, and also to provide vital health information in the preferred languages of people who do not have a strong English proficiency. So this bill was going to do a lot of good stuff for public health in terms of the pandemic, and it's also going to start to address health literacy, which is providing information in different languages so that people have access to services that they need within the government. And the thing that I just want to end with is that thanks to the efforts by the Refugee Advocacy Lab and, of course, to the countless other supporters that rallied behind this legislation, Senate Bill 318, as of this moment, is now law. That's a good thing, and it will do so much within a short time span to correct the wrongs that we see with vaccine delivery and language access across the state.
Mhm. Well, congratulations to you and to the state of Nevada. We have certainly seen during the pandemic many of the disparities in our health systems that already existed but have come to light, and it's great to see at the state level legislation that's creating more access to our public health systems at a time that we really need it now and into the future. So thank you for sharing that, as well as your personal story, which resonates with me as the daughter of an English learner, and I'm sure so many other people who are listening today. You know, at Welcoming America, we've seen how legislation advancing English learner services and language access at the state level enables inclusion at the local level. It creates an environment where local governments are also able to make these types of investments and their constituents see those results. So I'm wondering, first from you, Representative Johnson, and then back to you, Senator Donate, can you share any success stories that you've seen in your community as a result of some of the work that you've been doing and your partners are, or maybe share how individuals in your state are served by the policies advanced in your legislation?
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think the resolution that we passed was really interesting because it recognized the contributions of these refugee children to the public schools in Utah. And that's something that hadn't been done before. And what was really interesting about that is that because of the work that was done on it and the foundation that was laid for it, it actually passed unanimously in the House and in the Senate. And it gave some directives to state level folks for future legislation, which will carry the next session. But it creates an opportunity for us to write policy at the state level. For example, identifying the difference between just being active around somebody and actually having engagement. So one of the things that will happen in future legislation for us is to identify what family engagement is and require local education agencies, from the state level down to the local schools, to have school board policy about family engagement and to provide that engagement in native language. That's going to be really a really important thing, I believe. So that legislation is crafted and will be ready to go this next session. So I just wanted to make you aware of that, and I'm so glad to hear what's happening in Nevada and the difference that's going to make. I think the legislation that's going to be passed in Utah is going to do the same thing. It's going to break the ground, I think, in some areas and provide things. But in additionally to your question, we have a local agency right here in Logan that provides access and help to families of refugee and immigrant children, and so that's been very successful locally. But maybe the senator wants to talk about something, and then if you would not mind bouncing back to me, I can talk to you a little bit about some things I did in my work within schools that might be interesting for people to hear.
Let's do that. So we'll go to you, Senator Doñate.
Thank you so much. So with the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of state leaders, from my conversations with them, realized that we lacked, in the state of Nevada, we lacked the right infrastructure to do contact tracing and to translate health information to the needs that we had, the unprecedented needs because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And because of that lack of infrastructure, many of the local community organizations that represented different diverse groups stepped up to help translate and disperse that health information that was needed to help protect our frontline and essential workers, which many of them are refugees and immigrants. But given now that Senate Bill 318 is in law, it puts our state in a position to create language access plans, which essentially would mean that whether it's the DMV or the Department of Taxation or any particular department or agency, that they are now required and mandated by law to create language access plans to determine what are the needs and the people that you serve, so that when we come back in a different biennium, we can allocate funds to help address those resources so that the community boards that stepped up this time are being fairly compensated for the work that they're doing, and that we can build off of that. So that's one of the good things of Senate Bill 318, and it sets us up for a good future where everyone is invited and building on the idea of inclusivity.
I really like your approach there to looking across departments and agencies at how each individual agency has really a mandate around language access, and that this state legislation reinforces that need and also creates the flexibility for each agency to adapt a policy that will work well for them. So let's go back to you, Representative Johnson, to hear a little bit more about your work in the education sphere as it relates to immigrant families and their engagement.
Yeah, I think one of the really important things in education is you have to recognize the agencies and the services that are available locally. But in addition to that, and using of those, while you have those kids and families, I think you have to be really intentional about what you're going to do. So one of the things I recognized was that these kids, they simply didn't know how to do school in America. They had no idea how that worked. And the parents didn't either. And so I recognized that they felt lost. And so one of the things that I did was I wrote several grants that were federal grants to provide before school, during school, after school, and summer programs for kids, in addition to their regular school day, where they were given some special training in ESL and things of that nature. And what that did was is that it allowed us to recognize that kids they needed to find out what things were, where things are, And so in those before school, after school summer programs, we could take kids places, do things with them. And I got millions of dollars literally brought into our community for those programs. And we identified those kids, took them into places where they could have active engagement with learning, place-based learning, so that what they were learning in school, they could actually apply it in real life settings. And it made that learning come alive. And then we provided these special evening and summer events for families where they could come and actually engage with one another and find out that, we loved them and that they were welcome. So those kinds of programs made a huge difference in the success of kids in school. And the other thing, it changed the attitude and the reception of our regular full-time students to those kids and their families. It had a big impact. I want to tell you something. Stephanie Hunt is amazing. In that video, she talked about what she did with the kids. I have copies of those kids' stories. After that resolution was passed, her students came to me and presented copies of those books, and they're on display in my office. And I'm telling you, when you sit down and read those stories, you recognize that, you know what, these are human beings just from another place, and we need to treat them as such and get whatever we can for them, because if we don't, you can predict some of those outcomes, and it's not very good. So that's work I try to do locally in education to reach out with kids, and I have a lot of admiration for teachers like Stephanie who do that kind of work and do it with just such caring in mind.
That's wonderful. Such important work, both that you're speaking to in terms of Stephanie's individual programming and then similar programming that you've seen work across the state. And every day at Welcoming America, we see that, it's one thing to talk about policy with our residents, and it's another for longtime residents to really have meaningful experiences with newcomers and come to see the commonalities that they do have. And Senator Doñate, I wonder if you'd like to comment on that in terms of what you encountered as you advocated for this language access bill and some of the conversations that you may have had with constituents or with other legislators.
Thank you so much. So I think the main thing that I've learned from the different encounters and conversations that I had with different state leaders is that the public health system in Nevada is a little bit decentralized, and because some counties did not have health districts to carry out some of the work that was needed for this pandemic, they relied on the leadership from the State Department. And given that we have Senate Bill 318, I really want to emphasize just how impactful that's going to be, not just for this public health emergency, but the other ones that will follow after that, because Senate Bill 318 gave us guidance as to what are the things that we should be asking people whenever they get diagnosed with a particular illness. Simple things like, what's your preferred language, or what's your country of origin, so that we understand and contextualize your background, because that itself can influence the conversation of cultural competency and what different barriers you have in your culture to achieving a good health outcome. That's a really good thing that will be now prioritized across the entire state, including in rural counties that might not have the resources to do so. So once we establish that, that's how we can move forward with eliminating and reducing health disparities that we see with immigrants and refugees.
Mm-hmm. Great, and I'm so glad that you highlighted rural areas of the state, which sometimes don't get as much coverage when we're talking about immigrant residents and we're talking about multilingualism. And I'm wondering, Representative Johnson, if you'd like to speak to what you've seen across the state in terms of the benefits of multilingualism, of having multilingual, multicultural families in our schools and communities.
Yeah, In our state, the vast majority of the population is up and down the Wasatch Front. So that's from Logan, where I live, kind of down south to Crowville. And so that 120, 140 mile stretch is where the vast majority of people live. But the fact of the matter is that people can find other places to live in rural Utah as well. So one of the things is that there's just work like this. How do we develop infrastructure in the rural areas so that all people have access to it? So we have passed that legislation as well and have done a lot of funding for it. Matter of fact, in the most recent 2021 legislative session and in the special sessions after that, we allocated the highest amount of money that's ever been given to public schools in the history of the state. And so I'm very thankful for that. I also know that there's legislation coming from the federal government for distribution of funds. And so we have to watch that distribution of funds from the state agencies to make sure it does get out to all the areas. So, now I'm in a different spot, but I have a lot of oversight responsibility sitting on the Education Appropriations Committee and also on the Education Standing Committee. I see every bill that's related to education, and I see all the legislation related to appropriation requests. And so that gives me an opportunity to really do just what your question asked. What sort of infrastructure, what sort of programming, what sort of things are being remembered when it comes to all the kids across the state? I really see that as something that Utah right now is doing better than they've ever done. And so I'm actually pretty darn proud of that.
Well, congratulations. I think that's really some advances that many other states can look to, and an approach that we hope we'll see at the local and federal levels as well, in terms of looking at what particular approaches and investments need to be made in particular populations in order to achieve the outcomes that we're looking at, that we'd like for all of our students and all of our families. And to that effect, Senator Doñate, I'm wondering, regarding education and language support, refugee integration more broadly, we know there are new federal dollars coming. What's next for you when you think about language access and newcomer integration more broadly?
Well, building on the same thing of what Senate Bill 318 accomplished, I think what's next in terms of education and language access would mean to ensure that state agencies and departments are complying with the regulations established by Senate Bill 318. Also, I think it's important for us to remember that all of this is about cultural competency and not just translating items to a different language, but like paying attention to the dialects that people speak and to the needs of our people and our population. That means that with this bill and moving forward, we have to be able to carry out our language access plans to receive the necessary funding to provide this new infrastructure that we have all come to support. But beyond that, we have to also tackle language access in other sectors, for instance, health systems or local primary care providers, because that itself is where we see inequities in our systems. And this entire conversation, in reality, whether it's about multilingualism or the ability to speak a different language other than English or being English proficient, is that we recognize that everyone deserves the chance to be included. And it builds on the notion of equality for all. Providing resources that can improve language access is a civil rights issue. And to end with that, we all pay into this governmental system, and we should all be able to reap the benefits of this space together. So that's what lies next in terms of improving language access.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us in terms of what's coming for you and what you'll be up to. Representative Johnson, same question to you regarding education and language support, newcomer integration more broadly. What's next for you? What's on your mind?
Yeah, I think this policy And as the senator just said, it's one thing to pass a bill or have a resolution and then just see if there's compliance with it. And that's a very important point. So in this next session with these two bills, will be newcomer enrollment amendments. And so that will make sure that there's appropriate age documentation and that transcripts for kids are in a registry, and that they're actually treated the same way, and we get appropriate, proper information on all these children. Because if you don't have it, you don't end up necessarily doing exactly what they need. We can't miss them, and we can't forget them. And so that's going to be a really important requirement. I think the other thing I mentioned to you in this next step is the policies that at the state level, and working with the Utah State Board of Education and overseeing with this next bill policy changes for local education agencies to make sure that there's engagement. And I think that's a very, very important distinction. And that outreach and active engagement with families and having a policy on that is something for us to watch. So then the next piece of that is to make sure that we have the appropriate funding in education that can go to support that. So that's something I want to watch and make sure that we do moving forward.
Thank you for sharing that. And in turn, I'll share with you that family engagement is very near and dear to my heart, because my mother, who I spoke about earlier and was an English learner, became the first family liaison in our local public school system in Howard County, Maryland. And she was the first, but not the last. The county went on to hire about 20 more family liaisons who all speak multiple languages and are able to serve that bridging role. So we've seen over time the big impact that's had on families and the improvements in overall test scores and staff involvement with families. There's really many returns there. And so knowing that we have so many people listening today in various states and communities that may have a small but growing immigrant population, or may have really a large and long-time immigrant population, I'm wondering if you can each share, why do you ultimately think it's important for local communities and states to invest in refugee resettlement and integration? And we'll go to you first, Senator Doñate.
Thank you so much. I think it's important to invest in these services, particularly with refugee resettlement and integration, because Nevada is home to so many ethnic groups, and encouraging the development of cultural awareness by our fellow citizens is necessary in our interactions between each other. And in the element of culture includes attitudes, behaviors, beliefs, and values that are unique to each group and one another. But building on cultural awareness is understanding that between groups, there are only differences among these elements and no right or wrong element. And with the help and support of various advocates, we can begin to really make a difference in bridging the gaps that we see in public health for the groups that have been left behind or forgotten, which in that case will increase access to healthcare and a better understanding for all our citizens. That's the opportunity that lies ahead when we invest in these services. And the future holds for all of us to hope to keep our legislators accountable and to make sure that we are paving the way for a better future for all our families.
Thank you. And we'll go to you, Representative. Same question. Why do you see it as important for local communities and states to invest in refugee resettlement and integration?
You know, it just is it seems so simple to me. I've been to Asia, to Europe, to South America, Central America. Spent some time, in Mexico, and I loved it. But here's what I found out. spending time in people's homes in these places, I find out we are way a lot more alike than we are different. People have so many similarities. They just have different customs and traditions, maybe some ways of doing things. But when you think about that, here's what I see in education. When people are successful, when they learn things, when they know how to become a part of a community, they become self-sufficient. They become a part of it. I'm first generation American. My father was an immigrant, and I see what happened with that, and I see what's happened for me in my life. So I think that you have a lot more peace. You have a happier society. You have people who are taking care of themselves. You have people who want to help another person when they're successful. I think it just mushrooms. It just builds. It becomes this thing where we're all just a part of it. And I think if we open our hearts and our minds, we can make people feel welcome. We can make them feel a part of what we're doing in an individual community. Why wouldn't we want to do that? I mean, you can't give me a reason why you would not want to do that. We're just all better off when we do this, when we help our neighbors. And I consider all these immigrants, all these refugees, I consider them my neighbor.
Well, I couldn't think of a better note to end on, and considering how we're all neighbors and our fates are wound up in one another's, and that's why the type of legislation that both of you have advanced is so important to individual refugees, immigrants, but to our entire communities as well. We've seen so many benefits. So that's about all the time we have for today. I want to thank you for taking this time to share with our audience the importance of focusing on education and language access at the state level, why this is important for newcomers and the entire community, and for really modeling day in and day out a good example for other states, for localities, and for federal efforts as well. So a big thank you, and I'd invite you to add any final remarks as we close out.
Well, I would just like to say that I'm going to email the senator. I really think what he's done for his state is very, very important, and I'm so glad to hear that. And I'm thankful for the organizations here locally in my town, city, but also our state organizations that reach out and do resettlement and do that kind of work, because without the help of those organizations, lots of families would certainly be in trouble. So I want to give a special thanks to those resettlement agencies that work hard to help these families. And
to add on to those comments as well, I just want to share my deep gratitude and appreciation for the various groups that came together to host this summit today. I think there's a lot of work to be done, and this is really important to me as a ELL student and someone that has gone on to working now in the legislature. But as my dad always says, la lucha sigue, and there's plenty of work to get done. So I ask the viewers that are tuning in today to look at the organizations that are doing this work and ask how you can get involved, because there are plenty of ways, and we need all hands that we can get to push our communities forward.
We do. We need all hands on deck, and I'm so glad that the two of you will be connecting as part of that. So thank you again for your time. Thank you to the IRC and Refugee Advocacy Lab for putting this day together. To close out our session, we'll be sharing videos with you from Lubab with the Storytellers Collective, as well as a video of IRC fieldwork in New York and Washington, which will give you a taste of that local work that the senator and representatives spoke about, and that those listening today may be interested in getting involved with and supporting. So thank you. We'll cue that video.